Chapter 31. Stalemate. Absolute decimation, crowed Vidimeli. We should now chase those imbeciles and finish off what's left of the fraud's army. They should learn that nobody invades our fair motherland. Vidimeli had joined Daksha, Brigu, Parvateshwar and Kanakala in the emperor's private office. Though brigadiers did not normally participate in strategy meetings, Daksha had insisted that he be allowed to attend, keeping in mind his sterling role in providing the information about the elephants. Parvateshwar raised his hand to silence Vidimeli. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Vidimeli. Remember, Sati's tactics under pressure were exceptional. She managed to save most of her army. So it's not as if we'll have a huge numerical advantage if we chase them. Vidimeli fumed silently, keeping his eyes pinned on the floor. Praise for a rival. General? What is wrong with Lord Parvateshwar? She may have been a Meluhan princess once, but now she's a sworn enemy of our motherland. And we should not forget, said Kanakala, that the Nilkanth is sailing down from the north with a large army. The safest place for our army right now is within these fort walls. Nilkanth? Fumed Vidimeli silently, unwilling to argue openly with senior officers of the empire. He is not the Nilkanth. He is our enemy. And our army should be fighting, not keeping itself safe behind high walls. Kanakala is right, said Daksha. We should keep our army here and attack that fraud Nilkanth the moment his ship stuck. That coward left my daughter to fight alone while he went gallivanting up the Yamuna. He should pay for his cowardice. Vidimeli couldn't believe what he was hearing. Does anyone here put Meluha's interests above all else? Let's worry about Meluha instead of Princess Sati and her husband's duties towards her, said Brigu. Lord Parvateshwar is right. We have won a great victory. But we should measure our next steps carefully. What do you suggest, General? My lord, we have taken out their elephant corps and cavalry, said Parvateshwar. Sati's army is in retreat. Hence, I do not expect the Nilkanth to stop and attack us here. Of course he won't, quipped Daksha. He's a coward. Your Highness, said Brigu, barely hiding his irritation. The Maharishi turned to Parvateshwar. Why won't he stop here, General? My scouts have sent back confirmation of our earlier estimates of Ganesh's army, said Parvateshwar. They do have 150,000 soldiers. That is a big army, but it's not enough to defeat our forces if we remain within our fort walls, given that Sati's forces are no longer available to augment them. And from our defensive positions, we can slowly wear his army down. Therefore, the Nilkanth will not want to commit to a long siege here. He'll gain nothing and will unnecessarily lose men. So what do you think he will do? He will sail past Devagiri and join with Sati's army, perhaps in Mridikavati or Lothal. Then we should attack their ships, interrupted Daksha. That will be difficult, Your Highness, said Parvateshwar. Their ships are sailing downriver. We'll have to march on roads since there are no warships on the Saraswati. Under our control, they will have the advantage of speed. We will not be able to catch up. So where should we attack them? Asked Brigu. If we have to attack them, I would prefer to do so at Mridikavati. Why? Lothal is not a good idea. I have designed the defenses of Lothal myself, and sacrificing false modesty, I will say that those defenses are solid. We would need a 10-to-1 advantage in soldiers to conquer Lothal. We don't have that. We will be pitting 80,000 of our men against more than 200,000 of the joint Sati Ganesh army. Attacking Lothal will be a disaster for us, we will lose too many men. On the other hand, Mridikavati's defenses do not require that kind of numerical advantage. Also, we have 20,000 of our own soldiers within Mridikavati. I agree they may be imprisoned, but if they find out that their brother Meluhan soldiers are besieging the city, they may create a lot of trouble for the Lord from within. Having said that, I would expect the Lord to retreat to Lothal and not Mritikavati, for this very reason. Brigu had an inkling that Parvateshwar preferred an altogether different strategy. I get the feeling that you would choose not to attack at all. Not attack at all? Asked a surprised Daksha. Why not? Our army has tasted victory. Parvateshwar, you should. Your Highness, interrupted Brigu. Perhaps we should leave it to an expert like Lord Parvateshwar to suggest what we should do. Go on, General. The reason I suggest we avoid aggression right now is that the Lord Neelkanth would hope that we attack, said Parvateshwar. One cannot attack a well-defended fort without the advantage of numbers. We don't have that. So by attacking them, we'll gain nothing and lose too many men. So I say that we stay within the safe walls of Devagiri. If we wait for 6 more months, Ayodhya's army will get here. Combined with their 300,000 soldiers, we will have a huge numerical advantage over the Lord's army. So are you suggesting that we just sit around like cowards? Asked Daksha. It would not be cowardly to refrain from attacking when the situation is not in our favor, said Brigu, before turning back to Parvateshwar. Go on, General. Once Ayodhya's troops come in, we should march to Karakappa, said Parvateshwar. We still have control over the Indus command of our navy. Along with Ayodhya's soldiers, we will have a 400,000 strong army. Combine that with the vastly superior naval fleet that we have in the Indus, and we can mount a very solid attack on Lothal. What you are saying appears to make sense, said Brigu, before turning to Daksha. I suggest that we follow Lord Parvateshwar's strategy. Your Highness? Daksha immediately nodded his assent. But Vidin Mali could guess that the Emperor's heart was not in this decision. He wondered if there was an opportunity for him to convince the Emperor of a more aggressive course of action. The stunned army of Ganesh was transfixed by the devastation on the hilly battlefield south of Devagiri, as they sailed down the Saraswati. Bloated carcasses of elephants and horses littered the hill, flies buzzing around them. Crows and vultures fought viciously over the beast's entrails, even though there were enough corpses around for them all. The squawking and cawing of the feasting birds added pathos to the macabre scene. Of particular interest to the soldiers, though, was the fact that there were no human dead bodies on the battlefield. The Meluhans, true to their honorable traditions, had in all likelihood conducted funeral ceremonies for all their enemy warriors. Also, they noticed that there was no debris in the Saraswati. That meant Sati's ships had escaped the devastation, hopefully with most of her army intact. Shiva stood on the deck of the lead ship, surveying the battlefield along with his Sansan sister-in-law. He knew that he couldn't stop now and engage in a battle at Devagiri. He simply didn't have the strength of numbers anymore. He had to retreat farther south and find what was left of Sati's army. His scouts had already told him that the devastation looked worse than it actually must have been. Most of the infantrymen in Sati's army had survived and her ships were sailing south to safety. Shiva knew that with much of Sati's army intact, he still had a fighting chance in the war, but he would have to reformulate his strategy. All that was for later, though. His mind was seized for the moment with one thought alone: was his Sati all right? Was she hurt? Was she alive? Neelkanth, said Gopal, rushing up to Shiva. He had just received word from a Vasudev Pandit envoy, who was hiding on the eastern bank of the Saraswati, waiting for Shiva's ships to arrive. Lady Sati was still alive when she was pulled aboard one of the retreating ships. Still alive? What do you mean? She was badly injured, Shiva. She personally led the cavalry against the rampaging elephants and Meluha's own horsemen. Nandi and Veerbhadra managed to pull her to safety. She was unconscious by the time she reached the ship. Unfortunately, the man I talked to didn't have any further information. Shiva made his decision immediately. He knew that his naval formation would only be able to sail as quickly as the slowest ship. He couldn't wait that long. Ganesh, I'm taking the fastest ship and sailing down south. I have to find your mother's ship. Kali, Kartik and you will remain with the fleet. Avoid all battles, sail as quickly as you can and meet me at Mridikavati. Ganesh and Kartik stood mute, sick with worry about their mother. She's alive, said Shiva, holding his son's shoulders. I know she's alive. She cannot die without me. Shiva's ship had raced down the Saraswati and caught up with Sati's retreating fleet. He had clambered aboard his wife's ship to discover that his Sati was out of danger now, but still bedridden. However, this relief was accompanied by some terrible news received from a Vasudev Pandit. Reports of the devastation of Sati's army in Devagiri had given the Meluhan prisoners of war in Mridikavati the courage to challenge their citizen captors. They had broken out of their prison and taken control of the city. 3,000 citizens, loyal to the Nilkanth, had died in the process. Shiva had no choice but to avoid Mridikavati for now, as it was no longer safe for his army. He decided to sail down another distributary of the Saraswati and then retreat to Lothal. Orders had been conveyed through a Vasudev Pandit to Ganesh's army as well. For the moment though, Shiva remained on Sati's ship as it sailed down the Saraswati. Having checked on the naval movements with the captain, Shiva descended to Sati's cabin. Urvati sat by her bedside, applying soothing herbs on Sati's burnt face. Quickly and efficiently, she tied a bandage of neem leaves. This will ensure that your wound doesn't get infected. Sati nodded politely. Thank you, Urvatiji. Also, continued Urvati, thinking Sati may be concerned about the ugly mark which covered nearly a quarter of her face, don't worry about the scar. Whenever you are ready, I will perform a cosmetic surgery to smoothen out your skin. Sati nodded, her lips pursed tight. Urvati looked at Shiva and then back at Sati. Take care, my child. Thank you once again, Urvatiji, said Sati, unable to smile due to the scar tissue forming on her face. Urvati quickly walked out of the cabin. Shiva went down on his knees and held her hand. I'm sorry, Shiva. I failed you. Please stop saying that again and again, said Shiva. I've been told about the way our elephants reacted to the burning chili. It's a miracle that you managed to save as many of our people as you did. You are just being kind because I'm your wife. We have lost our elephant corps and most of our cavalry. This is a disaster. Why are you so hard on yourself? What happened at Devagiri was not your fault. We'd lost our elephant corps the moment the Meluhans discovered that the smoke from burning chili sends them into a state of panic. But I should have withdrawn earlier. You withdrew as soon as you saw the effect on the elephants. You had no choice but to go in with the cavalry, otherwise our soldiers would have got massacred. Practically our entire army is still intact. You did a great job to ensure that we didn't suffer even higher casualties. Sati looked away unhappily, still feeling terribly guilty. Shiva touched her forehead gently. Sweetheart, listen to me. Leave me alone for a while, Shiva. Sati. Shiva, please. Please leave me alone. Shiva kissed Sati gently. It's not your fault. There are usually enough tragedies in life that we are genuinely responsible for. Feel guilty about them, for sure. But there is no point in burdening your heart with guilt over events that are not your fault. Sati turned to Shiva with a tortured expression. And what about you, Shiva? Do you really think a 6-year-old child could have done anything to save that woman at Kailash? It was Shiva's turn to be silent. The honest answer is, no, said Sati. And yet you carry that guilt, don't you? Why? Because you expected more from yourself. Shiva's eyes welled up with the agony of that childhood memory. There wasn't a day in his life when he didn't silently apologize to that woman he hadn't been able to save, the woman he hadn't even tried to save. I expected more from myself as well, said Sati, her eyes moist. They empathized with each other in a silent embrace. Shiva and Sati's convoy of ships had just reached the last navigable point on this distributary of the Saraswati. From here on, the river was too shallow for the ships. Even farther, the Saraswati ran dry on land itself, unable to push through to the sea. Shiva had avoided the distributary which led to Mridikavati. He was on the southernmost part of the inland mouth of the Saraswati. From here on, his army would march to the frontier stronghold of Lothal. Leaving the empty ships behind was fraught with risk. It was only a matter of time before the Meluhans would get to know about it. Shiva would, in effect, be handing over 25 well-fitted military ships back to the Meluhans, which would allow them to move their army up and down the Saraswati with frightening speed. The decision was obvious. The ships had to be destroyed. Once his entire army had disembarked and the caravan that would march on to Lothal had been readied, Shiva gave orders for the ships to be burned. Fortunately there had been a break in the rains which had arrived early this year, allowing the fire to consume the ships quickly. Shiva stood observing the massive flames. He didn't hear Gopal and Chinardwaj as they stepped up to him. Lord Agni consumes things rapidly, said Gopal. Shiva looked at Gopal before turning back to the burning ships. We have no choice, Panditji. No, we don't. What do you suggest we do, Panditji? Asked Shiva. The rainy season is here, said Gopal. It will be difficult to mount a campaign to attack Devagiri any time soon. Even if we could, without the advantage of our cavalry, it is unlikely that we will be able to conquer a well-designed citadel like Devagiri. But it will be difficult for them to attack us in Lothal as well, said Shiva. Lothal, in fact, is better designed for defense than even Devagiri. True, said Gopal. So it is a stalemate, which suits the Meluhans just fine since all they will have to do is wait for the Indian forces to reach Meluha. They could be here in as little as 6 months. Silently, Shiva gazed at the burning ships, contemplating this unhappy turn of events. Chinardwaj spoke up. I have a suggestion, my lord. Shiva turned to Chinardwaj with a frown. We can draw up a crack force of Nagas and my troops, said Chinardwaj. The commandos will attack the Samras factory stealthily. It will be a suicide mission, but we will destroy it. No, said Shiva. Why, my lord? Because Parvateshwar will certainly be prepared for that. He's not an idiot. It will be a suicide mission all right, but not a successful one. There is one other way, whispered Gopal. The Vayuputras? Asked Shiva. Yes. Shiva looked back at the burning ships, his expression inscrutable. The Vayuputras appear to be the only recourse now. Chapter 32. The Last Resort. Shiva had pulled the light cloth over his head and wrapped it around his face, leaving his eyes open. His Ankvistram was draped across his muscular torso, affording protection from the fine drizzle. Satya lay in a covered Kartazaks and pulled it gently. She was strong enough to walk now, but Yarvati had insisted on exercising abundant caution during the march to Lothal. Shiva parted the curtains on the cart and looked at his sleeping wife. He smiled and drew the curtain shut again. He kicked his horse into a canter. Panditji, said Shiva, slowing his horse down as he approached Gopal. About the Vayuputras. Yes? What is that terrible weapon that they possess that Kali spoke of? The Brahmastra? Asked Gopal, referring to the fearsome weapon of Brahma. Yes. How is it different from other Devyastras? Asked Shiva, for he didn't understand. How a Brahmastra was so much more terrible than other divine weapons. Most Devyastras only kill men. But there are some, like the Brahmastra, that can destroy entire cities, if not kingdoms. By the holy lake! How can one weapon do that? The Brahmastra is the weapon of absolute destruction, my friend, a destroyer of cities. And a mass killer of men. When fired on some terrain, a giant mushroom cloud will rise. High enough to touch the heavens. Everyone and everything in the targeted place would be instantly vaporized. Beyond this inner circle of destruction will be those who are unfortunate enough to survive, for they will suffer for generations. The water in the land will be poisoned for decades. The land will be unusable for centuries, no crops will grow on it. This weapon doesn't just kill once, it kills again and again, for centuries after it has been used. And people actually contemplate using a weapon such as this? Asked a horrified Shiva. Panditji, using such a dreadful weapon is against the laws of humanity. Precisely, great Nilkanth. A weapon like this can never actually be used. The mere knowledge that one's enemy has this weapon, can strike terror in one's heart. No matter what the odds, one will surrender, one cannot win against the Brahmastra. Do you think the Vaidiputras will give this weapon to me? Or am I being too presumptuous? After all, I'm not one of them. They think I'm a fraud, don't they? I can think of 2 reasons why they may help us. First, they have not tried to assassinate you, which they would have, had a majority of them believed that you were a fraud. Maybe a strong constituency amongst them still respects your uncle, Lord Manabu. And the second? Lord Brigu used Devyastras in his attack on Panchavati. It was not the Brahmastra. But it was a Devyastra nevertheless. Even if it was fabricated from Lord Brigu's own material, he broke Lord Ryudra's laws by actually using one. That, I suspect, would have turned the Vayuputras virulently against him. And an enemy's enemy is a friend, said Shiva, completing Gopal's statement. But I'm not sure these are reasons enough. We don't have any other choice, my friend. Perhaps. How do we get to the land of the Vayuputras? Pariah is at a substantial distance towards our west. We can march overland, through the great mountains, to get there. But that is risky and time-consuming. The other option is to take the sea route. But we will have to wait for the northeasterly winds. The northeasterlies? But they begin only when the rains stop. We'll have to wait for 1 or 2 months. Yes, we will have to. I have an idea. I'm sure the Meluhans will set up spies and scouts in and around Lothal. Once they know that we have retreated into the city. So if we take the conventional route to Pariah, they will know that I have sailed west. Lord Brigu may guess that I've gone to the Vayuputras to seek help, which may encourage him to send assassins in pursuit. How about sailing south in a small convoy of military ships? Gopal immediately understood. We'll make them think that we are going to the Narmada. Onwards perhaps to either Ujjain or Panchavati. Exactly, said Shiva. We could disembark from our military ships at a secret location. And then set sail in a nondescript merchant ship to Pariah. Brilliant. The Meluhans can keep searching for you along the Narmada while we are on our way to Pariah. Right. And if we use just one merchant ship instead of an entire convoy, we could keep the voyage secretive and be quick. Right again. Sati stood at a window in a lookout shelter on the southern edge of Lothal Fort, staring at the vast expanse of sea beyond its walls. The monsoon had arrived in earnest and heavy rain was pelting the city. Shiva and his army were well fortified within the city walls. Ganesh was expected to arrive in Lothal within a week or two, along with his force. Urvati rushed into the shelter with a loud whoop, propping her cane and cloth umbrella beside the entrance. Lord Indra and Lord Varun, be praised. They have decided to deliver the entire quota of this year's rain in a single day. Sati turned towards Urvati with a wan look. Urvati sat next to her and squeezed the end of her drenched tank vistram. I love the rain. It seems to wash away sorrows and bring new life with renewed hope, doesn't it? Sati nodded politely, not really interested. Yes, you are right, Urvatiji. Not one to give up, Urvati plodded on, determined to lighten Sati's mood. I'm quite free right now. There aren't too many injured and the monsoon diseases have, surprisingly, been very low this year. That is good news, Urvatiji, said Sati. Yes, it is. So, I was thinking that this would be a good time to do your surgery. Sati's face carried an ugly blemish on her left cheek, where scar tissue had formed over the remnants of the burns she had suffered during the Battle of Devagiri. There's nothing wrong with me, said Sati politely. Of course there isn't. I was only referring to the scar on your face. It can be removed very easily through cosmetic surgery. No. I don't want surgery. Urvati assumed that Sati was worried about the long recovery time and the possible impact on her ability to participate in the next battle. But it is a very simple procedure. Sati, you will recover in a couple of weeks. We seem to be in for a good monsoon this year. This means there will be no warfare for a few months. You will not miss any battle. Nothing would keep me away from the next battle. Then why don't you want to do this surgery, my child? I'm sure it would make the Lord Nilkant happy. A hint of a smile escaped her solemn demeanor. Shiva keeps telling me I'm as beautiful as ever, scar or no scar. I know I look horrendous. He's lying because he loves him. But I choose to believe it. Why are you doing this? Asked an anguished Urvati. It won't hurt you at all, not that. You are scared of pain. No, Urvatiji. But why? You have to give me a reason. Because, I need this scar, said Sati grimly. Urvati paused for a moment. Why? It constantly reminds me of my failure. I will not rest till I have set it right and recovered the ground that I lost for my army. Sati. It wasn't your fault that. Urvatiji, said Sati, interrupting the former chief surgeon of Meluha. You of all people should not tell me a white lie. I was the commanding officer and my army was defeated. It was my fault. Sati. This scar stays with me. Every time I look at my reflection, it will remind me that I have work to do. Let me win a battle for my army, and then we can do the surgery. Dada, whispered Kartik, gently placing his hand on his angry brother's arm. Ganesh's army had just arrived at Lothal. They too had avoided Mridikavati as advised by Vasudev Pandit. Just like Shiva, Ganesh had ensured that all his ships were destroyed on the Saraswati before his army marched south to Lothal. They were received at the gates of Lothal by Governor Chinardwaj. Ganesh and Kartik had wanted to meet their parents immediately, but were informed by Chinardwaj that Shiva wanted to meet them beforehand. Shiva wanted to prepare them for their first meeting with their mother after her defeat at the Battle of Devagiri. Meanwhile, the allies of the Nilkanth, Bhagarant, the Prince of Ionia, Chandrakatu, the King of Branka, and Mintli, the King of Ashli, were led to their respective chambers in the Lothal governor's residence by protocol officers. The Chandravanshi royalty, used to the pomp and pageantry of their own land, were distinctly underwhelmed by the austere arrangements of the Meluhan accommodation. It was difficult to believe that the governor of one of the richest provinces of the richest empire in the world lived in such simplicity. However, they accepted their housing with good grace, knowing it was the will of Shiva. The army was accommodated in guest houses and temporary shelters erected within the city. It was a tribute to the robust urban planning of Meluhid that such a large number of new arrivals could be so quickly accommodated in reasonable comfort. All in all, a massive army, now totaling nearly 250,000 soldiers, had set up residence in Lothal. Having been briefed by Shiva, Ganesh and Kartik rushed to meet their mother. They had been told about the nature of her injuries. Shiva did not want the brothers to inadvertently upset her further. While Kartik was, as instructed by Shiva, able to control his anger and shock, Ganesh's obsessive love for his mother did not allow him that ability. Ganesh clenched his fists, staring at his mother's disfigured face. He gritted his teeth and breathed rapidly, his normally calm eyes blazing. His long nose was stretched out, trembling in anger. His big floppy ears were rigid. Ganesh growled, "I will kill every single one of those Ganesh," said Sati calmly, interrupting her son. "The Meluhan soldiers were only doing their duty, as was I. They have done nothing wrong." Ganesh's silence was unable to camouflage his fury. "Ganesh, these things happen in a war. You know that." "Dada, Ms. Right," said Kartik. Sati stepped close and embraced her elder son. She pulled his face down and kissed his forehead, smiling lovingly. "Calm down, Ganesh." Kartik held his mother and brother as well. "Dada, battle scars are a mark of pride for a warrior." Ganesh held his mother tight, tears streaming down his face. "You are not entering a battlefield again, Ma. Not unless I am standing in front of you." Sati smiled feebly and patted Ganesh on his back. Shiva walked into his suite of rooms in the governor's residence at Lothal. Sati had moved some of the furniture to create a training circle, and was practicing her sword movements. Shiva leaned against a wall and observed his wife quietly, so as not to disturb her. He admired every perfect warrior move, the sway of her hips as she transferred her weight, the quick thrusts and swings of her sword, the rapid movement of her shield, which she used almost like an independent weapon. Shiva breathed deeply at yet another reminder of why he loved her so much. Sati swung around with her shield held high, as her eyes fell on Shiva. "For how long have you been watching?" she asked, surprised. "Long enough to know that I should never challenge you to a duel." Sati smiled slightly, not saying anything. She quickly sheathed her sword and put her shield down. Shiva stepped over and helped untie her scabbard. "Thank you," whispered Sati as she took the scabbard from Shiva, walked up to the mini armory and placed her shield and sheathed sword. "We will not be able to go to Pariya together," said Shiva. "I know," said Sati. "I was told by Gopalji that Paryans only allow Vayuputras and Vasudevs to enter their domain. I am neither. Well, technically, nor am I." Sati pulled her Ankvistram over her head so as to cover her left cheek. She held the hem of the cloth between her teeth, covering her facial scar. "But you are the Neelkanth. Rules can be broken for you." Shiva came forward, and pulled Sati close with one hand. With the other, he held the Ankvistram covering her face and tried to pull it back. Even though she knew he did not care, Sati liked to hide her scar from Shiva. It didn't matter to her if others saw it, but not Shiva. "Shiva," whispered Sati, holding her Ankvistram close. Shiva tugged hard and pulled the Ankvistram free from her mouth. An upset Sati tried to yank it back, but Shiva managed to overpower her, holding her close. "I wish you could see through my eyes," whispered Shiva, "so you could see your own ethereal beauty." Sati rolled her eyes and turned away, still struggling within Shiva's grip. "I'm ugly. I know it. Don't use your love to insult me." "Love?" asked Shiva, pretending mock surprise, wiggling his eyebrows. "Who said anything about love? It's lust." pure and simple. Sati stared at Shiva, her eyes wide. Then she burst out laughing. Shiva pulled her close again, grinning. This is no laughing matter, my princess. I am your husband. I have rights, you know. Sati continued to laugh as she hit Shiva playfully on his chest. Shiva kissed her tenderly. I love you. You are mad. Chapter 33. The conspiracy deepens. Brilliant idea, Your Highness, said Vidin Mali. Daksha sat in his private office with his new confidant, Vidin Mali. The Meluhan Brigadier's increasing frustration with Parvateshwar's cautious approach had forged a new alliance. According to Vidin Mali, this wait-and-watch strategy of General Parvateshwar was giving Shiva's army time to recover from its defeat at Devagiri. He had begun to spend more and more time with the emperor. Daksha had got him reassigned to head a brigade of 1,000 soldiers that guarded the emperor, his family and his palace. This gave him a simple advantage: the brigade could carry out personal missions mandated by the emperor. Sensing increasing comfort in the relationship, Daksha had finally confided in him about his idea to end the war. Much to Daksha's delight, Vidin Mali's reaction was very different from Brigu's. Exactly! Exclaimed a happy Daksha. I don't know why the others don't understand. Your Highness, you're the emperor, said Vidin Mali. It doesn't matter if others don't agree. If you have decided to go ahead, then that is the will of Meluha. You really think we should go ahead? It doesn't matter what I think, Your Highness. What do you think? I think it is brilliant. Then that is what Meluha thinks as well, my lord. I think we should implement it. What are your orders for me, my lord? I haven't worked out the details, Brigadier, said Daksha. You will need to think it through. My job is to look at the big picture. Of course, said Vidin Mali. My apologies, Your Highness. But I don't think we can execute our plan till the Maharishi and the general leave Devagiri. They may try to stop us if they get the slightest whiff of our intentions. They were planning to leave for Kurakapa, or at least that was Parvateshwar's latest plan. I was not supportive of the idea earlier, but now I will encourage it and hasten their departure. An inspired move, Your Highness. But we must also concentrate on getting the right assassins. I agree. But where do we find them? They must be foreigners, Your Highness. We do not want them recognized. They will be wearing cloaks and masks, of course. You want them to look like Nagas, right? Yes, of course. I know some people. They are the best in the business. Where are they from? Egypt. By the great Lord Varun, that's too far. It will take too much time to get them here. I will leave immediately, Your Highness. That is, if I have your permission. Of course you have it. Accomplish this, Vidin Mali, and Meluha will sing your praises for centuries. Lord Gopal and I will leave within a week, said Shiva. Shiva and Gopal sat in the governor's office, surrounded by Sati, Kali, Ganesh, Kartik, Bhagat, Chinardwaj, Chandrakatu, and Mitli. The monsoons were drawing to an end, light smatterings of rain appearing occasionally, as if to bid farewell. Shiva and Gopal had decided to travel south, as planned, in their small convoy of military ships. They intended to rendezvous with a merchant ship at a secret location north of the Narmada Delta. The southwesterly winds would have receded by the time and the rains would have stopped. They would then board the merchant ship and use the northeasterly winds to set sail towards the west, in the direction of Paria. With luck, the deception would work and the Meluhans would be unaware of Shiva's actual destination. I want our destination to be kept secret, continued Shiva. Victory is assured if our mission succeeds. What are you planning to do, my lord? Asked Bhagat. Leave that to me, my friend, said Shiva cryptically. In my absence, Sati will be in command. Everyone nodded in instant agreement. They were unaware though, that Sati had fought this decision. After Devagiri, she didn't think she deserved this command. But Shiva had insisted. He trusted her the most. "Pray to Lord Ram and Lord Vayuputra that our mission is a success," said Gopal. Shiva stood on the shores of the Mansarovar lake, watching the slow descent of the sun. In the evening sky, there was no breeze at all and it was eerily still. A sudden chill enveloped him, and he looked down, surprised to see that he was standing in knee-deep water. He turned around and began wading out of the lake. Thick fog had blanketed the banks of the Mansarovar. He couldn't see his village at all. As he stepped out of the lake, the mist magically cleared. "Sati?" asked a surprised Shiva. Sati sat calmly atop a thick pile of wood. Her metal armor had been secured around her torso, carved armbands glistened in the dusky light, her sword lay by her side and the shield was fastened on her back. She was prepared for war. But why was she wearing a saffron angustam, the color of the final journey? "Sati," said Shiva, walking towards her. Sati opened her eyes and smiled serenely. It appeared that she was speaking. But Shiva couldn't hear the words. The sound reached his ears with a delay of a few moments. "I'll be waiting for you." "What? Where are you going?" Suddenly, a hazy figure appeared bearing a burning torch. Without a moment's hesitation, he rammed it into the pile of wood that Sati sat upon. It caught fire instantly. "Sati!" screamed a stunned Shiva as he raced toward her. Sati continued to sit upon the burning pyre, at peace with herself. Her beatific smile presented an eerie contrast to the flames that leapt up around her. "Sati!" shouted Shiva. "Jump off!" But Sati was unmoved. Shiva was just a few meters away from her when a platoon of soldiers jumped in front of him. Shiva drew his sword in a flash, trying to push the soldiers aside. But they battled him relentlessly. The soldiers were huge and unnaturally hairy, like the monster from his dream. Shiva battled them tirelessly but could not push through. Meanwhile, the flames had almost covered his wife, such that he couldn't even see her clearly. And yet, she continued to sit on the pyre, without attempting to escape. "Sati!" Shiva woke up in a sweat as his hand stretched out desperately. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. He turned to his left instinctively. Sati was asleep, her burnt cheek clearly visible in the night light. Shiva immediately bent over and embraced his wife. "Shiva!" whispered a groggy Sati. Shiva didn't say anything. He held her tight, as tears streamed down his face. "Shiva?" asked Sati, fully awake now. "What's the matter, darling?" But Shiva couldn't say a word, choked with emotion. Sati pulled her head back to get a better look in the dim light. She reached up and touched his cheeks. They were moist. "Shiva? Sweetheart? What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream?" "Sati, promise me that you will not go into battle till I return." "Shiva, you've made me the leader. If the army has to go into battle, I will have to lead them. You know that." Shiva kept quiet. "What did you see?" He just shook his head. "It was just a dream, Shiva. It doesn't mean anything. You need to focus your attention on your journey. You're leaving tomorrow. You must succeed in your mission with the VAYUPUTRAs. That will bring an end to this war. Don't let anxieties about me distract you." Shiva remained impassive, refusing to let go. "Shiva, you carry the future on your shoulders. I'm saying this once again. Don't let your love for me distract you. It was just a dream. That's all. I can't live without you. You won't have to. I'll be waiting for you when you return. I promise." Shiva pulled back a bit, looking deep into Sati's eyes. "Stay away from fires." "Shiva, seriously, what?" "Sati, promise me. You will stay away from fires." Yes, Shiva. I promise. Chapter 34. With the help of Umberjan, Shiva was ready to leave. His bags had been sent to his ship. He had ordered all his. It's out of his chamber. He'd wanted a few minutes alone with Sati. Bye, whispered Shiva. She smiled and embraced him. Nothing will happen to me, my good man. You will not get rid of me so easily. Shiva laughed softly, for Sati had used his own line on him. I know. It was just an overreaction to a stupid nightmare. Shiva pulled Sati's face up and kissed her affectionately. I love you. I love you too. A couple of weeks later, Shiva and Gopal stood on a beach in a hidden lagoon, a short distance to the north of the Narmada Delta. The small convoy of military ships had sneaked into the lagoon the previous night. Shiva and Gopal had disembarked into rowboats, along with a skeletal crew, and stolen onto the beach. Early next morning, the merchant ship that would take them to Paria arrived in the lagoon. Good workmanship, said an admiring Shiva. It was, without doubt, a bulky ship, obviously designed to carry large cargo. However, any sailor could judge that with its double masts, high stern and low bow, this craft was also built for speed. In addition, the ship had been rigged with 2 banks of oars, to allow for human propulsion if required. We won't really need the rowers, said Gopal. Our vessel will have the northeasterly winds in its sails. Where is this beauty from? Asked Shiva. A small shipping village called Umberjan. Umberjan? Where is it? It's to the south of the Narmada River Delta. That's not a part of any empire, Swadweep or Meluha. You guessed right, my friend. That makes it a perfect place to build ships that one doesn't want tracked. The local ruler, Jadavrana, is a pragmatic man. The Nagas have helped him many times. He values their friendship. And, most importantly, his people are expert shipbuilders. This ship will get us to Paria as fast as is humanly possible. Interesting. We should be grateful for their invaluable help. No, said Gopal, smiling. It is Paria that should be grateful to Umberjan, for the Umberjan have ensured that the gift of the Nilkanth shall reach Paria. I'm no gift, said a discomforted Shiva. Yes, you are. For you will help the VAYUPUTRAs achieve their purpose. You will help them fulfill their vow to Lord Rudra, to not let evil win. Shiva remained silent, as always, embarrassed. And I'm sure, continued a prescient Gopal, that one day, Paria too shall send a gift in return to Umberjan. How are you feeling now, my friend? Asked Gopal, as soon as he entered Shiva's cabin. The vessel bearing the 2 men had been sailing in the open seas for a little more than a week. They were far beyond the coastline and unlikely to run into any Meluhan military ships. They'd run into choppy waters though, in the last few days. The sailors, used to the ways of the sea, were not really troubled by it. Neither was Gopal, who had traveled on these great expanses of water many times. But Shiva had undertaken a sea voyage just once, from the Narmada Delta to Lothal, where the ship had stayed close to the coast. It was, therefore, no surprise that the rough sea had given the Nilkanth a severe bout of seasickness. Shiva looked up from his bed and cursed, his eyes half shut. I have no stomach left. It has all been churned out. A plague on these wretched waters. Gopal laughed softly. It's time for your medicines, Nilkanth. What's the point, Panditji? Nothing stays inside. For whatever little time the medicine remains, it will serve a purpose. Take it. Gopal gently poured a herbal infusion into a wooden spoon. Balancing it delicately, the chief Vasudeva offered it to Shiva, who swallowed it quickly and fell back on the bed. Holy Lake, help me, whispered Shiva, let this medicine stay within me for a few minutes at least. But the prayer probably didn't reach Mansarovar Lake in time. Shiva lurched to his side. and retched into the large pot that had been placed on the ground. A sailor standing by the bed rushed forward quickly and handed a wet towel to Shiva, who wiped his face. Slowly, Shiva shook his head and looked up at the ceiling of his cabin in disgust. Grap. Brigu and Parvateshwar rode on horseback at the head of a massive army that had marched out of Devagiri. They were on their way to the Beas River, from which point ships would sail them down to Kurukapa. I was thinking that the powerful fleet in Kurukapa is not the only advantage derived from our decision to shift our war command, said Brigu. Parvateshwar frowned. What other benefit does it serve, my lord? Well, there's also the fact that you will not have to suffer idiotic orders from your emperor. You will be free to conduct the war the way you deem fit. It was obvious that Brigu held Dakshaw in contempt, and did not think much of his harebrained schemes. But Parvateshwar was too disciplined a Meluhan to speak openly against his emperor. He was stoic in his silence. Brigu smiled. You really are a rare man, General, a man of the old code. Lord Ram would have been proud of you. Aided by the northeasterly winds pushing hard into its sails, the merchant ship was cutting through the waters with rapid speed. Having tossed and turned for a few days, Shiva had finally adapted to the sea. The Nilkanth was able, therefore, to enjoy the stiff morning breeze on the main deck at the bow, with Gopal for company. We are now crossing over from our western sea, through a very narrow strait, said Gopal. It's just a little over 50 kilometers across. What's on the other side? Asked Shiva. The Jamtra Iang. Sounds scary. What in Lord Ram's name does that mean? Gopal laughed. Something absolutely benign. Srayang simply means sea in the local language. And what does Jam mean? Jam means to come to. To come to? Yes. So this is the sea that you come to? Yes, a simple name. This is the sea you must come to if you want to go to Elam or Mesopotamia or any of the lands farther west. But most importantly, this is the sea you must approach if you need to go to Paria. I've heard of Mesopotamia. It has strong trade relations with Meluha, right? Yes. It's a very powerful and rich empire, established between two great rivers in the region, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Is the empire bigger than Meluha and Swadweep? No, smiled Gopal. It's not even bigger than Meluha alone. But they believe human civilization began in their region. Really? I thought we Indians believed that human civilization began here. True. So, who's right? Gopal shrugged. I don't know. This goes back many thousands of years. But frankly, does it matter who got civilized first so long as all of us eventually became civilized? Shiva smiled. True. And where is Elam? Elam is a much smaller kingdom to the southeast of Mesopotamia. Southeast? Asked Shiva. So, Elam is closer to Paria? Yes. And Elam acts as a buffer state between Paria and Mesopotamia, which is why the Parians have occasionally helped the Elamites unofficially. But I thought Paria never got involved in local politics. They try to avoid it. And most people in the region have not even heard of the VAYUPUTRAs. But they were concerned that an expanding Mesopotamia would encroach into their land. Expanding Mesopotamia? A gifted gardener had once conquered the whole of Mesopotamia. A gardener? How did a gardener become a warrior? Did he train in secret? Gopal smiled. From what I've heard of the story, he wasn't trained. Shiva's eyes widened with amazement. He must have been very gifted. Oh, he was talented. But not in gardening. Shiva laughed. What was his name? Nobody knows his original name. But he called himself Sargon. And he conquered the whole of Mesopotamia? Yes, and surprisingly quickly at that. But it did not satiate his ambition. He went on to conquer neighboring kingdoms as well, including Elam. That would have brought him to the borders of Paria. Not exactly, my friend. But uncomfortably close. Why didn't he move farther east? I don't know. Neither he nor his successors did, though. But the Vayuputras were troubled enough to offer anonymous assistance to Elam. The Elamites were able to rebel because of this support, and the conquest of the Mesopotamians did not last for too long. King Sargon seems like a very interesting man. He was. He challenged the entire world, and even fate itself. He was so feisty that he dared to name his empire after the water carrier who was his adopted father. His father was a water carrier? Yes, named Aki. So they called themselves the Empire of the Akkadians. And does this empire still exist? No. That's sad. I would have loved to meet these remarkable Akkadians. The people of Elam would have thought very differently, Lord Neelkanth. The soldiers are bored and restless, said Ganesh. They have been mobilized, but there has been no action, no battle. Kartik and Ganesh had just entered Sati's chamber and were happy to find Kali with their mother. I was discussing just that, with Didi, said Kali. The men are spending their time gambling and drinking to keep themselves occupied. Training is suffering because they don't see the point of it when there is hardly any chance of combat in the near future. This is the time when stupid incidents occur which can blow up into serious problems, said Sati. Let's keep them busy, suggested Kartik. Let's organize some animal hunts in the forests around the city. We know that the Meluhan army has still not moved out of Karakapa, so there is no risk in letting our soldiers out in large groups. Hunting will give them some sense of action. Good idea, agreed Kali. We can also use the excess meat to organize feasts for the citizens of Lothal. It will help assuage some of their irritation with having to host such a large army. The excitement and the blood rush will also prevent boredom from creeping into our troops, said Ganesh. I agree, said Sati. I'll issue the orders immediately. It was nearly a month and a half since they had started their journey from the secret lagoon off the Narmada Delta. Shiva's ship came to anchor off a desolate coast on the Jam Sea. There didn't seem to be any habitation of any kind at all. In fact, it appeared as though this land had never been disturbed by humans. Shiva was not surprised. Just like the Vasudevs, the Vayuputras were secretive about their existence. He did not expect a welcoming port of landing. But he did expect some secret symbol, something like the emblematic Vasudev flame on the banks of the Chambal near Ujjain. Then he thought he detected something. The coast was lined by a thick row of tall bushes, maybe 3 or 4 meters high. From the distance of the anchored ship, it seemed like these bushes had reddish-orange fruit hanging in abundance. The shrubs were covered with small dark green leaves, except at the top, where it was bright red. These bright red leaves combined with the reddish-orange fruit to give the impression that the bush was on fire. A burning bush. Shiva immediately turned and began climbing the main mast, all the way up to the crow's nest. Once there, the symbol became obvious. The bushes, when combined fault with the white sand and brownish rocks, came together to form a symbol that Shiva recognized only too well, Fravashi, the holy flame, the feminine spirit. Shiva came down to find Gopal standing below. Did you find something, my friend? Asked Gopal. I saw the holy flame, the pure being. I saw the Fravashi. Gopal was astonished at first, but not for long. Of course. Lord Minabu. He would have told you about Fravashi. Yes. It's a symbol of the faith of Lord Ayuda's people. The Fravashi represents pure spirits. The angels. They exist in large numbers, their scriptures say in the tens of thousands. They sent forth human souls into this world and support them in the eternal battle between good and evil. They are also believed to have assisted God in creating the universe. Shiva nodded. The Vasudevs believe in the Fravashi as well, I assume. We respect the Fravashi. But it is a pairing symbol. Then why do you have a Fravashi at the entrance to your land? Gopal frowned. A Fravashi symbol? Where? At the clearing on the Chambal, from where we communicated with you through clapping signals. Oh! Smiled Gopal, as understanding dawned upon him. My friend, we have a symbolic fire as well. But we don't call it Fravashi. We call it Agni, the god of fire. But the symbol is almost exactly like the Fravashi. Yes, it is. I'm aware that the Parians give enormous importance to fire rituals. So do we Indians. The first hymn of the first chapter in the Rig Veda is dedicated to the fire god, Agni. The importance of the element of fire is, I believe, common across all religions of the world. Fire is the beginning of human civilization. It is the beginning of all life, my friend. It is the source of all energy. For one way of looking at the stars is to see them as great balls of fire. Shiva smiled. A sailor walked up to the two men. My lords, the rowboat has been lowered. We are ready. The rowboat was 100 meters from the coast when a tall man appeared from behind the bushes. He wore a long, brownish-black cloak and held what looked like a staff. Or, it could have been a spear. Shiva couldn't be sure. He reached for his sword. Gopal reached out to stay Shiva's hand. It's all right, my friend. Shiva spoke without taking his eyes off the stranger. Are you sure? Yes, he is a Parian. He has come to guide us. Shiva relaxed his grip on the sword, but kept his hand close to the hilt. He saw the stranger reach into the bushes and tug at what looked like ropes. Shiva immediately caught his breath and reached for his sword once again. To his surprise though, 4 horses emerged from behind a thick row of bushes. 3 of them were not carrying anything, clearly ready for their new mounts. The 4th was loaded with a massive sack. Perhaps, it was carrying provisions. Shiva moved his hand away from his sword and let it relax. The stranger was a friend. Chapter 35. Journey to Pariya. I'm glad that the Vayuputras have sent someone to receive us, said Gopal. His sailors were offloading the provisions from the rowboat. Some of the luggage would be tied onto the 3 horses that would be mounted by Shiva, Gopal and the Parian, while the rest would be loaded onto the severely burdened 4th horse. How can the Vayuputras ignore the chief Vasudev, my lord? Asked the Parian, bowing low towards Gopal. We received your message from the Vasudev Pandit of Lothal well in time. You are our honored guest. My name is Kurush. I will be your guide to our city, Pariya. Shiva observed Kurush intently. His long brownish black cloak could not hide the fact that he carried a sword. Shiva wondered as to how the Parian would draw his sword quickly in an emergency if it lay encumbered within the folds of his cloak. The man was unnaturally fair-skinned, not seen often in the hot plains of India. While one may have expected this to make the Parian look pale and unattractive, this was not so. The sharp long nose, combined with a full beard, somehow enhanced the beauty of the man while giving him the look of a warrior nevertheless. The Parian wore his hair long, something that was in common with the Indians. On his head was perched a square white hat, made of cotton. For Shiva, the most interesting aspect was his beard. It was just like that of Lord Ayuda's image in the revered Vishwanath temple at Kashi. The distinctive beard of the previous Mahadev had many strands of hair curled into independent clumps. Thank you, Kurush, said Gopal. Please allow me the pleasure of introducing the long-awaited Neelkanth himself, Lord Shiva. Kurush turned towards Shiva and nodded curtly. Clearly he was one amongst those Vayuputras who considered Shiva a usurper, a Neelkanth who had not been authorized by his tribe. Shiva did not say anything. He knew that the only opinion that mattered was that of their chief, Mithra. Shiva mounted his horse, then turned and waved at the sailors as they rowed back to their ship. They intended to sail a little farther and anchor in a hidden cove. After a waiting period of 2 months, the captain would send out a rowboat once every 2 days to the spot where Gopal and Shiva had met Kurush, to check if they had returned. Kurush had already begun riding in front, while also holding the reins of the horse, bearing the provisions, when Gopal and Shiva kicked their horses into a trot. With the pairing safely out of earshot, Shiva turned to Gopal. Why does the name Kurush sound familiar? Kurush is sometimes also known as Kuru, said Gopal. Kuru, I'm sure you're aware, was a great Indian emperor in ancient times. So which name came first? Kuru or Kurush? You mean who influenced whom? Asked Gopal. Did India influence Pariah or was it the other way around? Yes, that's what I want to know. I don't know. It was probably a bit of both. We learned from their noble culture and they learned from ours. Of course, we can go on about who learned how much and from whom. But that is nothing but our ego, showing our desperation to prove that our culture is superior to others. That is a foolish quest. It is best to learn from everyone, regardless of the cultural source of that learning. The Parian rode ahead in solitary splendor. They had been traveling for a week now, and Kurush had determinedly remained uncommunicative, giving monosyllabic answers to Shiva's companionable queries. The Nilkanths had finally stopped talking to him. Did the Lord grow up here? Shiva asked Gopal. Yes, Lord Ryuda was born around this area. He came to India when we needed him. He was from the land of fairies. That would obviously make him our guardian spirit as well. Actually, I believe he wasn't born in Pariah, but somewhere close to this region. Where? Anshan. Doesn't Anshan mean hunger in India? Gopal smiled. It means the same here as well. They named their land Hunger? Was it so bad? Look around you. This is a harsh, mountainous desert. Life is perennially difficult here. Unless what? Unless great men are occasionally able to tame this land. And Lord Ryuda's tribe proved to be such men? Yes, they set up the kingdom of Elam. Elam? You mean the same one that the Akkadians conquered? Yes. That would explain the VAYUPUTRA support, wouldn't it? The Elamites were the people of Lord Ryuda. No, that's not the reason why. The VAYUPUTRAs supported the Elamites because they genuinely felt the need for a buffer state between them and the Mesopotamians. In fact, Lord Ryuda had made it very clear to his fellow Elamites, they could either join the VAYUPUTRA tribe, giving up all links with any other identity that they had previously cherished, or they could choose to remain Elamites. Those who chose to follow Lord Ryuda are the VAYUPUTRAs of today. So Pariah is not where Anshan used to be. No. Anshan is the capital of the Elamite kingdom. Pariah exists farther to the east. It appears to me that the VAYUPUTRAs accepted other outsiders as well, and not just the Elamites. My uncle was a Tibetan. Yes, Lord Manabu was one. The VAYUPUTRAs accept members solely on merit, not by virtue of birth. There are many Elamites who try to become VAYUPUTRAs but do not succeed. The only people who were accepted in large numbers, because they were refugees, were a tribe from our country. From India? Yes, Lord Ryuda felt personally guilty about what he had done to them. So he took them under his protection and gave them refuge in his land, amongst the VAYUPUTRAs. Who were these people? The Ajuras. Before Shiva could react to this revelation, Kurush turned and addressed Gopal. My Lord, this is a good place to have some lunch. The path ahead goes through a narrow mountain pass. Shall we take a break here? Lunch was entirely unappetizing and cold, with the harsh mountain winds adding to the discomfort. But the dry fruit that Kurush had brought along provided a boost of energy. much needed for the back-breaking ride that lay ahead. Kurush quickly packed the remaining food, mounted his horse and kicked it into action. After making sure that he had a good grip over the reins of the fourth horse, Gopal and Shiva settled into a canter behind him. The Asuras took refuge here? Asked Shiva, still in shock. Yes, answered Gopal. Lord Drayuta himself brought the few surviving Asura leaders to Pariah. Others, who were in hiding, were also led out of India by the Vayuputras. Some Asuras went farther west, even beyond Elam. I'm not really sure what happened to them, but many of them stayed on in Pariah. And Lord Drayuta accommodated these Asuras into the Vayuputra tribe, did he? Not all of them. He found that a few of the Asuras were not detached enough to become members of the Vayuputra tribe. They were allowed to live in Pariah as refugees. But a vast majority of the remainder became Vayuputras. A lot of them would have been the Asura royalty. Wouldn't they have wanted to attack India and take revenge on the Devas who had defeated them? No. Once they entered the Vayuputra Brotherhood, they ceased to be Asuras. They gave up their old identities and embraced the primary task Lord Drayuta had set for the Vayuputras, to protect the holy land of India from evil. Shiva inhaled deeply as he absorbed this news. The Asuras had been able to go beyond their hatred for their former enemies and work for the mission mandated by Lord Drayuta. In a strange twist of fate, the Asuras, who to the Devas were demons, were in fact actively working behind the scenes to protect them from the effects of evil, said Gopal. As he guided his horse to the right and entered a narrow pass, Shiva suddenly thought of something, and rode up to Gopal. But Panditji, I'm sure the Asuras would not have forgotten their old culture. They must surely have influenced the Parian way of life. It's impossible to shed one's cultural memes even after having moved away to foreign lands generations ago. Unless, of course, one becomes as detached as the ascetics. You're right, said Gopal. The Asura culture did impact the Parians. For instance, do you know the Parian term for gods? Shiva shrugged. Gopal glanced at Shiva conspiratorially. Before you answer, know this, that in the old Parian language, there was no place for the production and perception of the phonetic sound S. It either became SH or H. So, what do you think they called their gods? Shiva frowned, making a wild guess. Ahuras? Yes, Ahuras. Good Lord! What were their demons called then? Devas. By the great Lord Brahma. It's the exact opposite of the Indian pantheon. We call our gods Devas and demons Asuras. Shiva smiled slightly. They are different, but they're not evil.